there to hear you on the other end.
Okay, we're just waiting for the online folks. I thought I was going to have to corral you all from the food, and you all became silent, and there was no mic for me. Oh my God. Anyway, hello everyone. Welcome. I'm very pleased. My name is Janice Keefe. I'm the chair of our newly named department, Aging and Family Science. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our Who is Family and Why is it important? Today, we're going to celebrate as well the launch of a couple of new programs at the Mount Saint Vincent's Aging and Family Studies, Family Science Department. Whoops. Our department has been really thrilled to partner with the Vanier Institute of the Family to host this event. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to their co-exec director, Laurel Sakaluk, who will bring some greetings and provide the land acknowledgement. Laurel.
Thank you, Janice. Hello, everybody. I would like to join Janice to warmly welcome everyone attending here in person in Halifax and the many people attending virtually online from across the country. And I am delighted to be here representing the Vanier Institute of the Family, a national independent think tank focused on family well-being in Canada. We are a key central source of knowledge and evidence about families in Canada. You can find more information on our website and at the table in the front of the room if you're attending in person today. And we are very pleased to be partnering with the Department of Aging and Family Science at Mount Saint Vincent University, a leading program in Canada, to co-host this important conversation. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are grateful for the opportunity to live, learn, work, and gather on these lands. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and contributions of African Nova Scotian communities whose histories on these lands span more than 400 years. As we come together to discuss families, diversity, and well-being, we recognize that land acknowledgements are not an end in themselves. Meaningful reconciliation requires ongoing reflection, relationship building, and action. It calls on us to consider how we can contribute to more equitable, inclusive, and supportive communities for all families. May we continue this work together in a spirit of peace, friendship, respect, and shared responsibility.
Thanks, Laurel. Next, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing Mount Saint Vincent's President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Joelle Dickinson, who champions many causes, but especially the need to recognize diversity among families. Thank you for honoring our event by bringing welcome remarks from the Mount. Joelle.
Thanks so much, Janice. And given today's topic, Janice asked me if I'd say just a few words about my family. Might surprise you, I do have a family. So when I first came out of the closet, there were several times when I did experience fear and discrimination, even as a single person. However, it was nothing like the discrimination and fear that my family and I have felt. I'll talk about it like this. So my son's family, I'll talk about it in relation to my son's family. So my son's family is my wife, myself, and his dad. His dad also happens to be gay. We all even lived under the same roof for a short period of time, and we had a roommate whose last name was Bing. I kid you not. So it was like a sitcom. And today I'm like a sitcom because my new pants are making a really loud noise. So if you're a George Costanza fan, we're all set. So we're often not recognized as a family. Many of us, not just because we're a same-sex family, because you see my wife and son are both Black. And so often we're not seen as a family unit. And if I could describe the confused looks on faces when we showed up for parent-teacher interviews, to the bank, like we've had people looking at us like, who is this? Who's that? We never clarified because it was kind of fun leave them guessing. So navigating systems cause us a great deal of anxiety, especially going through airports, going through customs, internationally traveling. There's always a level of anxiety. We have been asked to not go through customs together by customs officers. They even made me go all the way to the other side of the room once when my son was 4, and he was very confused. But that's not the moment you pick a fight. So all this to say, when our son ended up in the hospital this winter with health issues, he had 3 parents and 2 grandparents who dropped everything to be by his side. And so having spent the night in the hospital myself when I was 4, getting my tonsils out alone, which was very traumatic for me, this kind of juxtaposition made me realize how lucky our son is to have so many loving people in his life. And so today, what I wanted to do is thank you all for the work that you're doing in terms of having people consider and question what a real family is, because I know if I got to choose which one I would have. So thank you very much for coming. And I am going to introduce Raymond Sewell, who is one of our proud alum. Raymond is trained in opera, but he's not going to be doing that today. He's going to be doing something much more exciting with an opening song. And Raymond, I invite you up.
I'm Raymond Sewell. When you say umsit, it means umsit nogama. All my relatives, all my relations. Family is everything for the Mi'kmaq people, the Skijialnu, the ones who walk this earth. I think about matriarchs when I think of family. You said to talk about family a little bit. I think about how our culture survived and thrived because of the choices they made in keeping and the data and stuff like that alive and proliferating our stories, Adukwakun and things like that. So I'm here because of my grandmother, and I always like to recognize the grandmothers and the earth. Rematriation is that interaction with the earth. Nedugulimp means you don't take more than you need. You sustain the earth sustains you. This is that relationship. So when I say umsit, that's really everything. Everything is family. So I'd like to start with a song. We always start by playing songs. Usually I sing Eco. Eco is a song that means we're there. But I want to sing a song called Bababijis. This is a pre-colonial song that I had sang to me. They tap my back and sing it. So I think it's fitting for this event. So Bababijis. Bababijis nanige bababijis. Apji juinak wel madun. Megaknin gesalu nagubuntemi. Nabuntemi. Naginek lalultes ni janchich. Gesalu. Mut wel majidas ni janchich. Nagubuntemi. Nabuntemi. Baba bijis nanige baba bijis. Apji juwina wel madun. Megaknin gesalu. Nagubuntemi. Nabuntemi. Naginek lalultes ni janchich. Gesalu. Mut wel majidas ni janchich. Nagubuntemi, nabuntemi. Baba bijis nanige baba bijis. Apji juinak wel madun. Megaknin gesalo. Nagubuntemi, nabuntemi. Baba bijina megi. So this is a lullaby we'd sing and share. This is how stuff were passed on in the rocking chair from the parents to the children. Culture goes underground, but it doesn't go away. So I'd like to share that. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Wow, how lovely it is to see everyone. I think most of you know me, but my name is Deborah Norris, and I'm one of the 4 faculty members in our department. I would like to add my own words very briefly of welcome to all who are gathered, to our Mount colleagues who've made time to be with us today, to fellow researchers who focus on families, community partners, and with particular pride, it's lovely to welcome current and former students. So before moving to the introduction of the panel topic, allow me to note the location of the accessible and gender-neutral washrooms that are located out the door and up 1 floor through an elevator. Also, details about online participation are posted in the chat for those of you who we are very grateful to have here with us today virtually. So now on to the introduction of the panel topic. Former students would know we talk about this all the time in our family science classes about how the population of Canada has become more diverse in recent decades. Families have also become more diverse as a result. And families are at the core of a healthy and inclusive society. We need to understand families, to support families, and to understand the diversities in order to recognize unique strengths and address inequalities that affect family well-being. So we are very excited about today's conversation and learning from our panelists, who you will meet in just a moment, who have different lived and professional experiences of family, and who will share with us about why it is important to engage with the question, who is family and why should we care? And to examine understandings of family that can leave some families unrecognized in policy, research, and law.
And I am delighted to have the wonderful job of introducing our moderator today, the Honorable Maryam Monsef. Maryam is founder and CEO of ONWARD and is a sought-after international speaker, facilitator, and strategic advisor. She has dedicated her life to women's empowerment and equity. She is a dynamic speaker who designs her keynotes and workshops to uplift women and provide them with a toolkit to thrive in their personal and professional lives. Balancing her role as a dedicated mother with her professional commitments, Maryam draws daily inspiration from working moms everywhere. She held various social and economic development files in government. She was president of the Queen's Privy Council and helped establish and lead Canada's first full department focused on women and gender equality. In 2018 and 2019, Apolitical named her one of the top 20 global influences on gender equality, alongside notable figures such as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Michelle Obama, and Malala Yousafzai. Through her business and volunteer work, she strives to foster a world where women and their families are thriving. Maryam, it is my honor to welcome you to the panel today.
Patrick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Hello, everybody. Bonjour. Morning. Salam alaikum. What a privilege it is to be on this sacred land in this beautiful campus. Thank you to everybody who's joining online, to all of you who've gathered today, and to Laurel and all the professors who are on the stage for trusting me with this very important conversation. When I first got the invitation to speak, of course I said yes. My very dear friend, Jonathan Bennett, who's never led me astray, said, consider it. He's on the board at the Vanier Institute for Family. And so, of course, I said yes. And then it's a great topic, family. It'll be interesting. And then I looked at the title, Who is Family and Why Should We Care? I grew up with a family that, for the most part, has been led by a woman. When I was 3 years old, my father was killed in a crossfire between the border of Iran and Afghanistan. And I was raised in what I understand is a multi-generational family with grandparents, aunts, uncles, my mother, and my two sisters. And we had so much fun. We had a great upbringing. We had no idea we were poor. We had no idea that we were asylum seekers, that we were refugees. And though we knew there was war going on, we were protected from most of the consequences and the immediate consequences of that war. When we moved to Canada, my mom is single mom with 3 preteen girls, moved to Peterborough. And for the first time, we were not living in the same household as a bunch of caregivers and kin and people who spoiled us with love and attention. And we felt lonely, we were isolated. And of course, for any newcomer to this place that we all call home now, there's that longing, that missing of home and wanting to go back because we didn't speak the language. We didn't know our way around. We didn't dress the same, and we worshiped differently than most people. But then people stepped into our lives whom we were not expecting, people who didn't understand anything we said at the time, who worshiped differently, but who treated us like family, people who helped us find housing, temporary and more permanent, people who registered us for school, people who helped us learn English, who invited us into their homes for Christmas and Thanksgiving so that we would feel like this is our home too now. When I was in school, we learned that family is a basic unit of society. Bada bing, bada boom. That's about all I learned in elementary and secondary school about what is family. And of course, like we all have family, right? We just take for granted that families are different. But when I entered politics, I realized how politicized family really is. And not just because, as President Dickinson mentioned, it took a long time for different family types to be considered legal, particularly same-sex marriage couples, but because in every political discourse, there's often a big rant about family values and families across the country and families everywhere. It's part of just the way we talk in politics. And yet, when I thought about what is family, who is family, the first image that popped into my head was the image of the nuclear family, mom, dad, children, and even the children was boy, girl. Despite the fact that I myself have never belonged and been part of a nuclear family. And that really made me think about why this conversation is important. Because as a former lawmaker, even I have a different bias when it comes to who and what is family. And if everything we talk about in government as policymakers, program creators, as lawmakers is focused ultimately on what do families in our communities need, then it is so important to have a conversation about who is family and to amplify that conversation. So thank you for trusting me with this conversation. The good news for everybody is you're going to hear from really smart people like Professor Margaret Campbell, Derico Simmons, Todd Augusta Scott, and PhD candidate Nahal Fakhari about their research and their expertise and experiences in their area. I welcome them to join me on stage, and I will begin to read out their bios as you give them a warm welcome. Patrick is miking everybody up with a smile backstage. We appreciate it. Welcome, welcome. Okay. So let me tell you about Margaret Campbell. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Aging and Family Science at Mount Saint Vincent University. She received a BA in Sociology in Women and Gender Studies from St. Thomas University and a PhD in Social and Cultural Analysis from Concordia University. She completed a MITAX postdoctoral fellowship at the Vanier Institute of the Family and the School of Rehabilitation Therapy at Queen's University. Grounded in critical and feminist frameworks, her research explores how institutions, policies, and social structures shape family life, particularly in areas that are often overlooked or stigmatized. Her work spans three interconnected areas: families, suicide, and grief, with particular attention to public safety. Families and organizational response to suicide loss, disability, and family life, including sexual rights, parenting, and well-being, as well as families and work, especially in high-risk or non-traditional occupations such as public safety and farming. She knows her stuff. Please give her a warm welcome. Dorico Simmons is an 8th-generation African Nova Scotian and nationally recognized leader in public safety, justice reform, and anti-Black racism. He currently serves as the Director of Community Justice at the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute, where he leads strategic initiatives focused on systemic change, community engagement, and policy development. Prior to working at the African Nova Scotian Justice Institute, Dorico worked as a senior executive advisor to the Deputy Minister within Nova Scotia's Office of Equity and Anti-Racism Initiatives and spent a decade with the Halifax Regional Municipality managing community crime prevention and youth initiatives. Dorico is the founder and president of Ignite Consulting, co-founder of FOR, and a founding member of ACCE and GC 902. He has advised governments, institutions, and organizations across Canada on equity, leadership, and systemic racism, and impacts of race and culture assessment. Assessor Dorico holds a Master of Education in Counseling from Acadia University and is a Canadian certified counselor through the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. Visit his website for learning more about Dorico, including the ignitegroup.ca or doricosimmons.ca. Welcome, Dorico. I'm so excited to learn more about the depth of expertise you bring to this panel. Todd, Augusta, Scott, and I go a little way back. He's known internationally for his work with gender-based violence, narrative therapy, and restorative justice. He has worked as the lead therapist and executive director of Bridges, a domestic violence counseling agency founded in 1993. He developed a safety and repair approach to addressing gender-based violence in community and employment settings. He has presented his work internationally as well as in every province in Canada. He's widely published in the field and co-editor and author of 2 critically acclaimed books. His work's been highlighted in the documentary A Better Man. For his work in the field, he has received recognition awards from the Canadian Social Work Association and the Department of National Defence. He also served as an advisor to me in my time as Minister for Women and Gender Equality on the National Advisory Council on Gender-Based Violence. Now, let me tell you about Nahal Fakhari, but give Todd a big hand first. Nahal Fakhari is a PhD candidate at Dalhousie University with over 15 years of lived experience as an Iranian immigrant in Halifax. Her academic and professional work focuses on the well-being of immigrant children and families. She is dedicated to understanding the unique needs of newcomer children and their families, as well as their experiences accessing programs and services during their transition in Nova Scotia. Nahal is a strong advocate for inclusive, equitable, and culturally responsive practices within the education system. Her work emphasizes the importance of creating learning environments that recognize the value and value the diverse cultural backgrounds, languages, and lived experiences of students and their families. Her doctoral research examines how cultural identity representation among Iranian girls shapes their sense of belonging, social integration, emotional well being, and highlights the complexities of navigating multiple cultural contexts. Please welcome PhD candidate Nahal Fakhari. So for all of you, let's begin before we dig too deeply into specific questions about your personal or professional experience with families, the significance of family or family diversity in your work. I know that you've had some time to think. My job is to move this thing along, so let's keep it punchy and let's dig in with personal and professional, and then we'll open it up to the folks who are gathered here and online for some questions. Who'd like to go first? I think the mics are already on, right, Patrick? No, I would sit down, dude.
So just thinking about some of the work that I do and how important diversity is and the way in which it's operationalized. I think sometimes when we think about families with disabilities, that's what I'm going to draw on a lot here in our conversation today, we assume that we're talking about families in which a child is disabled. Right? That's often the typical image that maybe comes to our mind. But I'm really interested in looking at families in all of their complexity and diversity. So whether it's when we think about families with disabilities, that could be, yes, a child, it could be a grandparent, it could be an aunt or an uncle, it could be a parent themselves. So I actually see parents with disabilities as particularly underserved, largely because some of our ideas about who is a competent parent often disservice them and marginalize them. So when I think about family diversity in relation to families with disabilities, we realize that, oh gosh, disability can enter our family lives in so many different ways, through care relationships, through injury, age, illness, right? And furthermore, disability itself is not the only way through which we navigate this world, right? So the way we experience disability is going to be informed by gender, age, sexuality, race. So some of these ideas kind of come up in like normative ideas about what a family with a disability looks like, come up in policy, everyday conversations, media. And I think it's really important that we actually kind of shift, disrupt, and challenge these narrow understandings so that we can understand families in all of their diversity.
Thank you, Professor. Especially that piece about who is a competent parent. I'd love to dig in a bit more on that. Dorico, would you like to go next?
Sure. You might see me looking at my notes. I generally don't do this, but there's a couple things I want to get right. First, I didn't have in my bio, but I would like to mention I am an alumnus of MSVU. I was in the child and youth program. So a couple things is that, so I began my career working with families as a young African Nova Scotian kid, born and raised in Bears Westwood or public housing. So at age 12, I began working, volunteering for a small, well, I say volunteering, but a small stipend. And I began formally working at age 15, where I was making maybe $6 or so an hour with 1 hour a week. And that was my beginning and sort of introduction to working with families. I was teaching their children how to play basketball. And so when I look back, I realized I wasn't just teaching sports or teaching basketball. I was learning about community, relationships, responsibility, and care. And today I'm a husband and a father of two African Nova Scotian boys, aged 9 and 2. And so I occupy a different place in that story now. You know, I'm no longer simply a child being raised by the community. I'm a part of the community responsible for raising others. So a couple things that I want to sort of hammer home. I'll skip some of these useless notes here. is that so we frequently ask families to solve problems that were created by systems. We ask grandparents to absorb the consequences of housing shortages. We ask communities to address violence without investing in prevention. And then we ask families to navigate complicated healthcare, justice, and social services systems that sometimes even the professionals struggle to understand. Then, when families are overwhelmed, we too often label them as dysfunctional. I think we need to challenge the narrative. And so what if some of what we describe as family dysfunction is actually institutional dysfunction? What if the question isn't what's wrong with the family, but rather what pressures has this family been carrying and for how long? And how has the system failed them? The VIF framework focuses on family structure, family work, and family identity. And it's important because it focuses and forces us to move beyond stereotypes. It reminds us that family is not simply a structure. Family is work, family is caregiving, family is sacrifice, family is identity, and family is culture. So if we're being honest, some families are doing extraordinary work with very little support. As someone who works in justice, I often see people at some of the most difficult moments in their lives. When someone enters the justice system, we tend to focus on the individual, but the consequences are rarely individual. Every court appearance, every sentence, every period of incarceration ripples through an entire family network. And so children, partners, parents, grandparents, and communities all carry those impacts. The same is true for poverty, mental health, housing insecurity, and discrimination. The burden is rarely carried by one person alone. That is why family diversity matters, not because diversity is a buzzword, but because policy built around one vision of a family inevitably excludes people whose lives don't fit that vision. And the reality is that many families never have. In African Nova Scotian communities, collective caregiving has always existed. Extended family networks have always existed. Community parenting has always existed. These weren't alternative models, they were survival strategies developed through generations of exclusion and resilience. The challenge for us is whether our institutions are willing to recognize and value those realities. Because when systems only recognize certain families, they don't become neutral, they become barriers. For me, family is not defined by a census form, a legal document, or a household composition chart. Family is the people who carry us when life becomes heavy. Family is where we learn who we are. Family is often our first experience of both struggle and resilience. And if we're serious about strengthening families, then we have to equally be serious about examining the systems that shape their lives. Because families should not have to be extraordinary simply to survive. Our goal should be creating conditions where families in all diversity have the opportunity not just to endure, but thrive. And so the last thing I'll close with is that families should not have to overcome the system in order to receive support from it.
Thank you so much. I would love to come back and talk a bit more about, we ask families to take on the failures of the system. And then when they're overwhelmed, we say it's a dysfunctional family. So would love to hear more from you, Dorico, about how do we ensure that the system is building resilience? And why is it that there's only that one image or definition of family? So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Naha,
Yeah.
let's hear from you.
So as a person belonging to the immigrant community and working with immigrant families through research, I learned that the definition of family diversity is very unique to immigrant family situation. And what I understood is that there is a cultural definition that immigrant family comes with, but there's also the settlement and immigration process really makes them to redefine what family is. And sometimes this process is very rapid, changing based on their needs and support that they need. And from the research that I did, there are many different types of families. And what I learned is that we need to enter their spaces with a sense of not knowing what family is and what they are, and their definition may not fit for sure not fit the normative definition is there. I worked with, I heard stories from unaccompanied children coming to Canada from immigrant families that they apply to migrate together, but then through the migration process,
a family member needed to stay back. There were families that migrated together, but as the migration is a family experience, it's also very individually experienced, meaning that during the settlement, family members may not be able to go through the process for the challenges that they have, so they need to go back. There are multi-generational families, as you mentioned at the beginning, that the parent with the grandparents live together. There are cases that immigrant families rely heavily and build relationship and friendship with people who help them to go through the settlement process. The teachers, early childhood educators, cultural brokers, interpreters, they become their source of trust that they build new families here in Canada. There's also a unique case of refugees who flee their countries for political views or certain identities that they have. So they define their families based on who they can trust and who fits their definition, or who has their same values in life. So going back and wrapping up this section, I think it is very important when working with immigrant families, really reflect deeply about how you define family and how they define it, and having the space open for them to define who family is at that time and space, because that may change.
Thank you, Nahal. The specific experiences of Iranians in Canada. Thank you. In Afghanistan, they say water you didn't ask for grants you a wish. So when you take a sip, just make a wish. The Iranian diaspora and the experiences of probably more Iranians leaving their homeland to come to places like Canada makes your research even more relevant. So I'd love to hear more about you, from you in the next round, about what specifically does it mean when you're also leaving trauma behind, and the trauma is ongoing as the crisis continues to unfold, if that's okay. Todd with 1D, over to you.
So I have how many minutes for this round? I just want to keep on track.
Pardon me?
How many minutes do I have?
You do you, Todd.
Okay. All right. So I'm Todd, down from Truro. And I'm going to talk about diversity a little bit towards the end in terms of how we work with diversity in the context of family violence. So I'm going to build towards that in this brief presentation. So we've been working in a nonprofit in Truro for about 30 years. And primarily we work, with the Mi'kmaq community, and we work with, variations in terms of gender and so forth. And the approach that we've come up with over the years we call safety and repair. And when we first came into this field of working with, I'm going to talk about guys experiencing violence and women being victimized by violence, recognizing there's all kinds of more complexity. I'm just going to use that for clarity and shorthand, and I'm happy to unpack all that. We worked with guys around violence, and frankly, we were pretty cynical about them changing. So now we're talking about building safety, which is about stopping violence, but we've actually moved the conversation. We actually, over a while, became better at our jobs and figured out, oh yeah, we can actually, invite men into a space where they could stop their violence, and actually not only do that, they could go further, and they could actually invest in looking at the harm that they did and want to invest in that and look at what repairing the harm might be in their particular situation. So safety and repair is part of what came out of that. And when we're saying repair, we're going to spend a little time with that. I really mean repairing harm in relationship, and what we're empowering the men to do, and what we're trying to do ourselves as workers, is to figure out how do you repair harm without creating more harm. So, and that's going to be in both situations, both when the men and or the woman, but both when the men are hurt. How do you repair harm with the person who hurt you in a way that doesn't create more harm? And also with when he's hurt, her or whoever else, how does he repair harm without creating more harm? So that's the template that we're looking at. To be clear, in terms of repairing harm, what we mean by that is it doesn't necessarily mean reconcile. So I'm talking about the context of intimate partner violence, doesn't necessarily mean reconciling or restoring intimate relationships. Repair in one context might mean distance, that she doesn't want him to contact him anymore unless she initiates. That's what repair might look like in one context. In another, it might look like, it may restore an intimate relationship, but the idea is, again, not the idea is about repairing harm. So there's lots of harm that can be repaired, even if they don't get back together, from holes being repaired in walls, to making sure the kids are dropped off on time, to renouncing the violence in front of the children. There's just lots of harm that can be done. It's not dependent on whether they're together or not together. We really, and this goes a little bit to the diversity within domestic violence. We did pretend in the early days that all the women were just going to leave and never see him again. And we just pretended that that was, what was going to happen. He was going to get rehabilitated for somebody else down the line. And just as we, became more responsive to the diversity of the women that we're dealing with, we could start hearing the fact that wasn't the reality for most women. Even if they were separated, they shared children, or they lived in the same small community. So part of this is being able to repair harm, even if the relationships ended. So the safety and repair approach has 3 phases. Just briefly, we have a counselor for both parties. We work with them separately. That we move through a safety phase, which is stopping the violence, the second phase, which is preparing people to repair harm, and then a third phase, we might open up communication between the parties to actually facilitate that repairing harm. That may be, the communication may be just between the counselors or through video or through in person or emails, depending on whatever's not going to create more harm. And so in terms of diversity, obviously in this work, not everyone, both parties would need to be in phase 3 to be able to facilitate communication between the 2 parties safely, to be able to work on repair. So we're not going to set a woman who's in phase 3 and ready to have conversations around repair where the guy is dangerous and minimizing the abuse, denying it, blaming her, all that. We're not going to set up that conversation. Again, the reality is we thought, again, all the guys were the same. And we all thought this work was about high risk and that it was about chronic physical violence. That is a portion of this population that we work with, but frankly, it's a small portion of the population. Just as we became better listeners over the years, we stopped treating it like a one-size-fits-all approach, where we just put guys in 20-week groups and everybody came in the same. They all had to go from A to Z. And now we can just see, as we became better listeners and more responsive to the women who are talking to us in terms of what they think could be helpful and where they are in the process, and to the men as well. There's lots more diversity within that I'd like to share, but I'll wait for that for now.
Thanks, Todd. I think you walk a very tight rope in a very, very sensitive setting, and that you define for us what repair means is very, very helpful. And if gender-based violence is so prevalent that at least 1 in 3 Canadians has experienced it, that means that there are people in this room and online who are either victims or survivors. And so thank you for clarifying that it could mean repairing the hole in the wall, and it could mean keep your distance. What I'd like to dig a bit deeper into in the next round with you, Todd, is that phase 2 that you described, the prepare to repair piece, so that we can all have a better understanding. Dorico, can I come back to you now? Is that okay?
Of course.
Take it away.
Sure. So you had asked a couple of questions in the previous. I want to respond just a little bit to those. I think as Dr. Norris may remember, I'm going to say some things that may make some folks uncomfortable and or be challenging. And so one of the questions was around why one definition of family, and then in addition as well around systems being forced to be resilient, if I remember correctly. So I'll speak a little bit from perspective of the justice system and systems overall. So when we think about the justice system here in Halifax, here in Nova Scotia, one, we have to think about when these systems were being developed, when these systems were being created, massive colonization. Black people were considered property. Women did not have a voice. And who was creating these systems? It was straight, heteronormative white men. And so the actual ideology of the systems that we're working in right now, and it's almost like we're trying to fit a square into a circle because some things just simply do not fit. Think about the geography of where police stations are in relation to Black communities. There's one in every Black community. There's one in every public housing community. How do you think that that affects families today? And then when we think about, in terms of making, how can we make systems work better for families or more resilient? This may sound funny, but implement the reports. There's many reports I'm sure that people are aware of that we know that have happened that just sit, but at the time are very good politically, but they simply just sit. Again, this may sound but listen, communities and people and families will tell you they're the experts in their own lives. They know what works and they know what's not working. But a lot of times people don't listen to what people are telling them. They listen to respond rather than listen to actually act. Diversify. I think that it makes really the best business case because sometimes it's the way we have to, but it makes the best business case to have the most diverse people, most diverse perspectives around the table when we're creating these laws and policies. I think that disagreement is good and we land at something in the middle that everybody cares about. Value lived experience. Lived experience, in my opinion, in many ways and in many different contexts is much more valuable than a few degrees, especially if we're creating something for real people on the ground who are experiencing the thing. Audit your own policies. And then it's not about you. And some of this is a little bit to I guess, political or politicians or counselors, if you will, because one of the things that I often think about is, would you rather do what's right or would you rather do what's easy? And a lot of folks will do the thing that's the populist approach rather than the right thing to do. So, I guess even thinking that prior to colonization, the Mi'kmaq, and every time I hear folks, Mi'kmaq elders and folks speak, there's a beautiful way of thinking about family, thinking about the interconnectedness. And, I dream sometimes and think about, well, how beautiful and different would our world be if colonization didn't happen and our families operated in the way that we speak about. I guess maybe this is just, but the last thing I would say is that, we do these land acknowledgements and then we sit down and we may not think about it again, but we're in a sort of a family context and thinking about land acknowledgements, thinking about what has happened, and then thinking about how families were destroyed. And then we acknowledge that we're on the land that we had taken. And so hopefully that responds a bit to some of the prior questions.
Yeah, I think what you said about implement the friggin' reports is very valid. But I will push back and say dollars are limited, time is limited. It takes time to shepherd laws through the system. It takes time to develop programs, and politics does matter. What the populist movement is about is democracy. Like, what do people want? What are people shouting and pushing for? And let's implement it. So my next question for you, and don't pass the mic just yet. I want to know how to make what is right the more populist thing to do. Any advice you might have on activism and mobilizing that could create the conditions to make what may be hard more palatable? And if you need time, we'll come back.
Well, I think what I would say first is that digging in and having these difficult, I know this sounds a bit cliche, but having these difficult discussions And sometimes we're shielded away from the reality of the situations that people are facing because it's tough to look at. But the things that are tough to look at often make people act and make people move. We could think about COVID. We could think about George Floyd. We could think about the 94 calls to action. Many of those things were right in your face. And I find that it's those particular things that will make things move and will make action. I don't have I may come off as if I have, a cynical view of a lot of different things, but I work sort of in these particular situations every day. And so I think that also giving families, giving communities agency and that their voice can and will lead to change within their community. There's many things, as an example, in public housing that I lived in public housing for 22 years and that people are still complaining about to this day. And should those families be sitting down with the lawmakers or sitting down with the folks in Nova Scotia Provincial Housing to say these are the things, and then they actually see something happen, that is when you're going to start seeing tensions reduce, and that is when you're going to start seeing people believing that something different is going to happen. But I really believe in giving people and families and community the agency, but then also seeing that the thing is actually happening.
Yeah, I agree. The agency, and then I would go one step further and say the tools to engage in the political discourse, because it takes a certain kind of political literacy to actually push for changes at the right time in the right way. And thank you also for looping back to that concept of umsit, all our relations, which the only place I've learned it from is from the first people of this land, and how different would our homes and our families and our lives would be if, instead of the colonized roots of the system, if that were the system upon which everything else was built. So thank you for that. Now, let's, in that spirit of courageous conversations that really move things, over to you.
Yeah, thinking back to the immigrant families, and particularly Iranian, who are coming from conflicted, traumatic zone areas, and the past couple of years, everything is intensified. And I actually did my research during a very difficult period. I had my recruitment back in July, and it was the start of the whole new war in the Middle East. And that really impacted me as a researcher, being the very first time in a space that my community is actually experiencing trauma. And I always say that when you're once an immigrant, always an immigrant, because you are living a double life, because your feelings and emotions are in your home country, you have relatives back there, and then you are living this life here that it's safe and sound, but secure, but you also feel the guilt of feeling safe. This again, the conflict that is happening back home, it's impacting all the families, especially Iranian families, reflect all those families that are from conflicted zone areas. That in my conversation with the girls, because they were aware of that, in my doctoral work, they were aware of something is happening. They were not comfortable talking about it because of all the feelings and emotion that comes with it. But they know something was going on, and they were having the conflicting feelings that, yes, we want acknowledgement, but we also don't want to be singled out as someone that is from Iran, and the media is just showing the conflicts and wars, and it does not reflect the beauty of the community, that the strength that comes with it inside and outside, and the relationship that's built within diasporic communities, and then the bridges that people are working together to help that event, if it's emotional, if it's financially, if it's in through protest, or like in small ways. And they have different political views, but they are trying to work as a community through this conflicted time in the best way they can. And again, that is the definition of family comes. That different circumstances. Again, the rapid changes of who families, who we can trust, how we can help within the community. So my doctoral work, again, was in a very unique situation that it was new to me. It was new to the families. But again, it brought a lot of conversation among the communities and even within myself, reflecting what it really means to be a researcher, working with youth who are also, this is a big concept of war and conflict back home. And this is something that we are experiencing, but others don't experience. So there is a piece of finding people who are going through the same situation, go through the same feelings and emotions, and have the same background. And that was one of the things that the girls told me, that having a cultural identity, it sometimes feels like there is a better understanding to find people who share the same values, have same child rearing practices, or have same I don't know, like sleepover rules. So it's less explanation for them, and they feel less singled out. And there are cases that they feel discriminated for who they are, for the language that they speak, for the accents that they have, for the food that they bring in. And they are having different resources. Some of them stand up for themselves. Some of them make the decision to slide away. But again, the education system is created based on the assumption and values that reflect the experiences of middle class, English-speaking white settlers, and that's really brought a bring a deficit lens to looking at Iranian students, at least. Yeah.
How old are these girls?
They were 11 to 13.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And in Halifax?
In Halifax, yeah.
And may I ask, what would change things for them if you
They-
could speak to educators?
Yeah, so I actually, my project was participatory. I strongly believe in participatory community-based research because immigrants already, their voices are absent from research. So I wanted to create a space to hear directly from them, to understand what it means to be an Iranian girl with a Persian identity in Nova Scotia, where the population of Iranians are very limited. So the work that I did, ask them about what changes do you want to see. So, for example, one of the girls said that before in my country, I was a great storyteller. I danced beautifully. I was the person who did this and that at home, at my school environment. But here, I'm like nothing. I can't speak my language. I can't read in English. I cannot dance. And there is no point of me being recognized in this environment. And the language piece for some of them was very heartbreaking, because they were like, I'm in a place where I feel like my voice is in a cage. I can't speak English and I can't speak Farsi for 7 hours. So it was very informative. And then the calendar and the fact that Iranian celebrations are not acknowledged at all.
I was 11 when we came to Canada, and that feeling of I can't speak the language, therefore I do not exist, I do not matter, really, really hurt at the time. So thanks for bringing that to this space. And it actually makes me think about the impact of programs like you as a youth teaching young people basketball, the impact of something like that for someone who doesn't need the language to learn. I think that's a really lovely experience, and I hope you to talk afterwards. Professor, some thoughts from you, some more thoughts from you, and a mic for you.
Well, the comments here have been making me reflect on, like, maybe the question that we're dancing around is not so much who is family, but who's recognized as family, right? Because we have our own individually held subjective understandings and experiences of what family is. And if you look at the research, people are rarely talking about biology. They're talking about the people that they communicate most with, that they care for, that provide them some kind of effective support, or give them some kind of emotional closeness. And I think this question of who is recognized as family is really important, as is who is denied family through incarceration, through institutionalization. So we know here in Canada, or even in Nova Scotia more specifically, we're kind of at this precipice where we have made some significant changes to the ways in which people with disabilities live. They are being brought out of some of these institutions, more into community living. And in some ways, this gives me hope, because I see that people with disabilities now actually have more opportunities to participate in not just community life, but family life as well. So it's this idea, yes, we can have these personal definitions of family, but I think, Dorico, you said something about like a square peg in a round hole, right? Like we do family, but family's also done to us. That's how I think about gender. Like we do gender in everyday life and we bring it into being, staying with family, but it's also imposed onto us via policy, for example. So let's say I need to take work off to care for somebody I consider family, but my workplace doesn't see as family. Good luck. Right. So I think thinking about like who's denied family, and then you folks have all made some really important points about like the challenges that families experience, particularly from my view, the challenges that families with disabilities in Canada experience. They say more about the way we've organized Canadian society, how we organize care, who's seen as worthy of support, than they do about disability itself. So I think we're dancing around some really interesting conversations. And this notion of a deficit lens that you brought up, like how we actually shift out of this deficit lens for so many different families, whether it's families with disabilities, immigrant families, these kinds of things. So that's an interesting question for us to consider, like how do we actually push back? And I think some of the work that you folks are all doing helps to actually challenge and counter those narratives. So,
Professor, one of the things I learned in politics, and it's not popular, but it happens to be true, that it's the business of squeaky wheels. Out of sight, out of mind. And before I became a mother, I was like, why don't we hear more from mothers? Like, if only mothers knew how powerful a force they were, and they could make change by putting pressure on us on this and this and this issue. And persons with disabilities make up, what, 1 in 4? Is it 24% of our population? Is that an accurate?
about that, yeah.
Okay, and so what are some of the ways that those barriers that I think everyone's talked about hearing more from those who need to be included in and recognized as families in Canada? What are some of the barriers that could be removed to create space so that they are part of the squeaky wheels?
Okay.
All right.
No, so just one example for people with disabilities. I mentioned parents at the outset because I really wanted to foreground them as a distinct and underserved group. So here in Canada, we have policies in which if you choose to get married or live common law and you're a person with a disability, the way we calculate some of your benefits depends on your household level of income. And when you become partnered with somebody, you become their dependent, and the government starts to claw back your benefits. So we've actually disincentivized getting married for people with disabilities. Like marriage equality really isn't there, if you ask me, for people with disabilities. This is something that has been, BC actually just changed some legislation around this to make it more amenable for people with disabilities who want to cohabitate, who want to get married. So changing policies like that would help to address some of these barriers. I know we've done some kind of an intersection between immigration and disability as of 2018, roughly, we did some changes around our immigration policy to allow families with disabilities to immigrate to Canada. Prior to that, we had a medical exclusions clause deemed something around excessive demand, where people with disabilities had many barriers getting to Canada. There's several high-profile cases in which families were denied entry based on these clauses. So those are just two, I think, like examples of where we've seen some change, but where we could also see more change with regards to families with disabilities.
It's really powerful, Professor. We disincentivize marriage equality for persons with disability with financial penalties. And maybe we didn't mean to do it, but that's super clear and super helpful. And just to close the loop on before I became a mom, now I know that moms are busy. And there's so much demanding their time and attention. And most moms I know are burnt out. So I just want to close that loop. Last word to you, Todd, and we have about 3 minutes.
I'll take it. First, I do want to talk a little bit about the prep, but before we do that, I just want to talk about one more example of repair that was meaningful for me in my journey towards moving the work just from, which of course, safety is important, but that we could move further than that. Often the men and the women who come into the program are blaming her for his violence. So men are often blaming her for the violence, and the women are often blaming themselves for the violence. So as we began to get traction with guys and actually taking responsibility and influenced by some of the work coming out of Australia, I was starting to kind of get blown away by what the level of responsibility I was hearing guys take in my office. But it did occur to me during that time period that, like, who would actually probably really benefit from hearing him take responsibility and not blame her? And so I began to talk to the woman's worker and saying, I think she, like, women had always wanted to be flies on the wall to these conversations. And we were just, it was never safe enough. It was never safe enough. And it probably wasn't at that point because we weren't that good at our jobs. But part of what, so I talked to the woman's worker, do you think the woman, would benefit from this? And so basically we asked the woman and the woman's worker to come in, and I interviewed him in front of her. And part of the conversation was about him saying in front of her and to her that he was 100% responsible for his choices to use abuse and violence in the relationship, that he knows that he blamed her and that was wrong that he did that. And that, there's no excuse for abuse. And to actually hear that from him, like, we've been trying to convince women for years that they weren't to blame for his abuse, but to actually have him tell her, the guy who had been telling her that, for those women who have access to that kind of communication, that is often healing for them, repair for them. I want to be clear when I'm talking about repair, I don't mean the men being able to make it all better. I'm just talking about making it better. They can make it better. They may not be able to make it all better in terms of the trauma that they've perpetrated, but often women do want them to take responsibility, to renounce the violence in front of the kids, to take responsibility in front of them, and that can make it better. Just last piece, just in terms of preparation. So there is a 4 kind of component piece that we're looking for, that we move people through. And part of that's acknowledging the abuse, slowing down, studying it. This is all done individually before we would ever open up communication. So that's one component, is actually studying the abuse, coming up with a plan to spot the warning signs so you can interrupt it, and then really investing in what the effects of the abuse are. And that's a very painful process for a lot of guys, looking at the impact they've had on their kids and on their partners. That's often, shielded by denial and numerous other things. And then investing in, upon knowing and studying the effects and eventually hearing from her about what the effects are, then having a plan for actually how to repair those effects. So we do all those components of repair before we would open up those kind of conversations. They're not left to chance if we have those conversations at phase 3. Everybody knows what those conversations are about. It's about an opportunity for the guy to take responsibility, to acknowledge what he did and repair the harm. Again, just by way of diversity, we never thought those guys existed. And now, as we've changed our position, clearly some guys aren't going to change, but we really did think that was all the guys before. And frankly, now that we're again are better at our jobs. Most of the men can. That's diversity. That's invisible often in our fields of domestic violence.
Todd, in future discussions, I'd love to hear from you based on your, decades of experience in this area, how to align the family court processes with that, particularly that second phase that you just elaborated on a little bit. So thank you, everybody. Just so you know, we went completely off script. And so we just let the conversation be guided, and I appreciate the work the panelists did to make this conversation even more authentic. So I think that says it is time for questions from the room. So I don't have to channel my inner Oprah and come in and stick a mic in your face, but there are lovely colleagues in the room who are going to do that. So either raise your hands if you want to say something, and if you don't want to say anything, if you don't want somebody to shove a mic in your face, avoid eye contact with them.
Thank you. And thank you to all the panelists for your comments today. Todd, I have a question for you. Miriam, in your opening comments, you talked about the power of the nuclear family image. And part of that concept, I think, is an assumption that families are always sites of caregiving and support. And Todd, you have shared with us today how that is not always the case. So my question for you is, how does that cultural understanding of family, that families are always a site of love and caring, impact your work and affect how you support and work with families?
And maybe you could tell us your name and the institution you represent, just for the folks who are listening.
Thank you, Miriam. I am Dr. Laurel Sakluk, and I am acting co-executive director of the Vanier Institute of the Family. Thank you.
So often we assumed in the early days that the men just were coming in wanting power and control in their relationships, power and control will, and so forth. And then as I actually just became more responsive and more curious in my practice, rather than me thinking I knew everything before they even came in the room, as I began to be open to how they might actually respond when I asked them, often, these ideals, these values came forward. The guys would start talking, and it's surprised to themselves as much as me about wanting love, caring, and kindness. And so and also taking responsibility, like what they wanted their kids to learn when they made bad choices or when they made mistakes. Because again, the men are coming in, blaming other people, making excuses, justifying it, and all that kind of stuff. But if I can ground the conversation in how men would actually prefer to be in relationship and what their values might be, then that lays a foundation then in taking responsibility for, then I can set up a framework where we can talk about how a guy might prefer to be in a relationship and how he doesn't always live up to his values. And so I can set it within that framework. It doesn't mean that, so I can set it with a framework of respect, caring, and trust. Doesn't mean he doesn't want power and control in relationship and that influence isn't there. It's just, if I highlight the fact that he also wants love, caring, and kindness and safety for his kids, then he is forced to look at that. It's like that ends up being a confrontation, and it's all just done through my curiosity. I'm not confronting him. I'm not being oppositional with him. I'm going to lay the foundation of his own values and ethics, and then get him to measure his choices against those values. And then again, I can relate to that with the men, of course, in terms of people not always living up to their values, that we can be in that frame. And then what do you want to do? What do you want your kids to learn when they don't always live up to their values? And so we can build a foundation of taking responsibility, repairing harm, what that looks like. So so I just enter a space where those things exist at the same time. And that took a while to get to. The guys could actually want love, caring, and kindness, and be using violence in their relationships at the same time, and allowing for that space and those contradictions to come through.
Thanks, Todd, for that. I think the word I was looking for your work is delicate. And courageous too. And thank you, doctor, for reminding us that not every home is a safe home. Not every family is a safe family. Is there a mic? Okay, tell us. You're pointing at them and they're pointing at you. Are you doing the Canadian thing of you first? No, you first. Okay.
Exactly.
Maybe
Yeah.
tell us your name and who you
Oh, I'm Cassandra. I'm helping moderate on the online end.
Okay, Cassandra.
And an online participant had a question that read, we've heard a lot about systems and communities, so I'm curious, if we return to a more community-oriented way of living, how do you think the definition of family would change? For example, raising children collectively within a community, relying less on money and more on exchanging goods and services, how we give care to family members, fostering family-friendly workplaces, etc.
Thank you, Cassandra, an online participant. Would like to take that. To Dorico.
Yeah, so I'll start this out. So beautiful question. And, you know, I think, well, first I would say is that there are places that do operate in that way. And I know within the African Nova Scotian community, there is a lot of that sort of operation happening. But what I think maybe in reverse is that our society is, I just see a lot of like, I gotta like, gimme, like I have to make sure that I do this and forgetting about the sort of the communal piece and how it would change. I think that we may see less individualism. We may see less capitalism. We may see less. We may see less violence. We may see people caring for each other more. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen. Certainly, especially in Canada. I know that that's one of the things we're known for. But I think that the ideology would change drastically so much so that our policies would look different. There was a comment down here about the bereavement policy. I had a note on it. Is one that my wife talks about often is that the bereavement policy says 5 days, that's all you get, and it's for immediate family only. And who is to say that, you know, my cousin, who I take as my sister or et cetera, is not my family? And so the policies may actually simply look different, and our society, I think, would look different in a way that so I'll say it this way is that I have 2 children and it's my responsibility to take care of my children. But in a sort of a communal setting, we may look at each other as it's our responsibility to make sure that we're all doing well. It's my responsibility to make sure that my neighbor and their family are doing well, rather than just walking by, you know, somebody who may be experiencing homelessness or sleeping on the street. We're going to take it as our responsibility to make sure that they're doing well. And so I just think fundamentally it may actually change the way that we look overall at each other. And one quick thing I wanted to just add in terms of the question around who is being recognized is maybe to add a couple more just for thought purposes, is that who is being recognized, but who is doing the recognizing? And then why does that matter?
Thank you, Dorico. Does anyone else want to respond to Cassandra's question?
I feel like,
No, please go ahead.
okay.
We're,
Oh, okay. I feel like with immigrant families, because of that linguistic and cultural barriers, there is a heavy reliance on community work and communities, especially when the piece of cultural identity or learning the language for children comes into place. But the community is not just here. Families maintain communities across world. So again, with the increase in migration, for example, in case of Iranian, the communities now is everywhere, and they maintain a relationship with them. With the technology now, there are classes that children attend, or they are the advices that we get for the child rearing practices. Again, I'm looking at more a perspective of living that culture alive in immigrant children in case of Iranian. So there's a lot of community work, and the family, the definition of family becomes really big, like national, global community.
Thank you for that. Since there are several questions in the audience, may I suggest we take 2 or 3 at a time, and then we come to our panelists? Okay, doctor. Tell us your name.
Hi, my name is Noreen. I'm in the institution of a community member. I love the idea of community being more involved in all of our experiences. There were so many highlights that I heard while I was listening over the last hour. Family, disability and family. The repair that you talked about touched me. When I saw the post about this and I saw diversion in family, the thing that came to me was about estrangement. And the pain and the grief that comes with that, and how one ever or if is able to repair that. And I think you kind of I could see a line into the idea of estrangement must happen with some of the things that everyone talked about, but I just needed to say the word.
Thank you, Noreen. That was lovely. And we'll give the folks here, particularly you, Dr. Campbell, with your expertise in grief, to respond to that if you wish. I see a couple of other hands up.
Oh, is it Micah? Hi, I'm Molly. I'm at the Mount right now in my 3rd year doing honors in psychology next year. I have a lot of interest in how family dynamics influence emotional regulation and processing in children. And my question is for you, Todd, mainly. I volunteer my time in a private practice for children. And a lot of the work that the psychologists do is to kind of raise kids, especially boys, who are more emotionally open and expressive and sensitive, so that later down the road there's less aggression and more emotional vulnerability and understanding of their partners. Do you think that there would be a correlation between encouraging emotional expression in young children and then perhaps maybe less domestic violence later in life, or more acceptance of wrongdoing?
Great question, Molly. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyone else? Sorry, Todd. Let me just get a couple more. And if there's another one, Cassandra online, maybe we'll take that one too next.
Hi there. I'm Sonia Gall. I'm an alum of Mount Saint Vincent, 57 years, I believe. Anyway, I'm looking at the title, Aging and Family Science, is the department, and thinking of being a grandmother, thinking about the aging part. And I've heard maybe mentions, for immigration and multi-generational, that the grandparents are important, but the grandparent resource is one that I'm thinking about, and compassionate caregiving of people in the grandparent kind of age. And so those aspects and how they could be involved in improving family dynamics and family relations. I'm currently where teenagers, well, maybe if you're really mad at your parents, you can come talk to me for a minute. But, more broader than that, I'm interested in the area of, the elder generation, how they can be a part of this family and caring.
It's a great question. Thank you so much, Sonia. I see people pointing at people, but maybe stand up if you have a question so that our Oprah people can see you more clearly in the big room.
Hi, I'm Selena. My question is, I was kind of online and kind of looking at the conservative discourse around, especially during the Canadian election. And I was kind of wondering how families are kind of pushing back against this conservative discourse.
Selena, thank you. Do you mean the backlash to the definition or the diversities of family? Can you elaborate just a little bit?
I'm pulling just from the election and kind of how the conservative discourse on anti-immigration that's going on in Canada, and how families are kind of pushing back. And
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's a very brave and important question, Selena. Thank you. I appreciate it. Cassandra.
Okay, this one is specifically for Todd.
Oh, Todd.
How have you seen the repair and safety approach change family dynamics? Has it changed the way families define themselves and also family in general in your experience?
Thank you, online participants. So we heard from Noreen, from Molly, from Sonia, from Selena, and folks online. And who'd like to go first? And we've got, according to Vanna White over there, we have 3 minutes left. Three-ish, you know. But Todd, we'll let you go first. Professor will come to you, and last words, we'll give it to Nahal and Dorico.
But just very briefly, in terms of the trauma and the men's trauma and how it relates, we were always afraid to talk about that because we were afraid to like excuse it or justify it. And also we know that lots of people are traumatized in childhood and don't go on to beat up people in adulthood. And at the same time, the guys that we're really scared about, the fact that like 99% of them have horrible trauma. Do I think that's related? I do think it's related. It's just that it's not a linear causality because you get beaten up, then you beat up other people and you become repressed and afraid and you don't share anything vulnerable and all that. Trauma gets resolved in all kinds of different ways along the way through, and sometimes it doesn't. And so that would influence men's choices to use violence in a relationship, just like gender does, unhelpful gender ideas. So we definitely spend a lot of time just asking guys, you know, where they learn that stuff, that they have to keep it all to themselves, you know, and what it means to actually take responsibility, you know, into the trauma that's gone into that. I mean, a lot of these guys have, learned that if they made mistakes when they were younger or made bad choices, they get beaten up. That's what it meant. It meant violence. And so the fact that they don't come into my office all ready to take responsibility and admit mistakes, you know, again, I often have to go back to that early template in terms of how they think I'm actually going to treat them. So we do a lot of that tracing back some of the ideas that stem from childhood.
Thank you, Todd.
Noreen, thank you for your question and for kind of eliciting that perspective. I think it's really important. I had the pleasure of exploring some, I don't have an answer, unfortunately, but maybe some like more things to think about because myself and 6 fantastic graduate students that I had the pleasure of teaching this past semester explored some questions around going no contact with families and whether this is indeed on the rise as media reports kind of indicate. We tried to trace a bit of a longer history to say, well, yeah, maybe there's been a longer history than we're actually recognizing in which people have had to negotiate these relationships and go no contact. So I think there has been increasing attention, but it's always kind of been there. And I think it's very difficult for people to think about going no contact, partly because we think of family relationships as enduring, always like, non-negotiable, right? You even expressed through some of our family sayings, right? You can't choose your family, right? And the assumption also that our families are going to be safe havens in a heartless world also makes this process more difficult. I also think it depends on the family member. So we hear more about children going no contact with parents as opposed to parents going no contact with children. And I think that also indicates some kind of assumption that we have about the roles that we're supposed to take on in our families and what we're supposed to accept and not accept. So just appreciate you kind of extending our conversation. Oprah, she was mentioned earlier, Oprah just did an episode on this, like it's on YouTube. I got the students to watch it. So Noreen, it's there for you too, if you're interested. It doesn't have all the answers either, but an interesting conversation nonetheless. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Let's tag Oprah and whatever social we do as a result of this.
Look under your chairs.
Y'all go home with Dorico? No?
So I wrote 4 things down quick because I know I'm waiting for a time to flash. I was wondering if you're doing that in real time too, by the way, just printing them on.
No, the big guns just are behind you.
Okay. So a couple 4 things I'll mention quickly is that Every family, no matter their makeup, no matter who they are, where they come from, has the potential to thrive, to contribute, but not every family gets the same opportunities. I would also argue that one of the clearest signs of privilege in any system is never having to justify your existence to that system. Systems tend to recognize relationships on paper. Communities tend to recognize relationships in practice. And the last thing I would say is that families I work with spend more time proving that they're legitimate rather than receiving support.
I'm just going to say a few words about the changes in immigration policy. It's very discriminatory. It it breaks up more families. It enhances this discrimination practices in school. Again, if it's set at the top, it means it will be practiced in the system. And it will influence the well-being of immigrants, children, at the intersection of different identities. It exacerbates. And yeah, I don't have any more words on this. It's just heartbreaking that this is the reality that we are living in, despite the awesome contribution of immigrants in Canada at every single level.
From the very beginning. Thank you so much to our panelists, to those of you who showed up, who planned it, who funded it, who engaged online. What I'm leaving this room with is families, the people who show up for you and the people you show up for. And that having the time and the space for conversations like this is healing. And it's also mobilizing. And academic institutions and think tanks play a really, really important role in mobilizing the movement we're going to need to see changes that lead to more families being recognized as true families in law, in policy, and in practice. So thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Miriam. At the Vanier Institute of the Family, we spend our days talking about the diversity of family experiences across the country. And today, thanks to all of you and panelists and Miriam, thanks to your thoughtful, engaging moderation, my understanding of who families are in Canada has deepened and evolved in very important ways. And I hope that all of you joining us today had a similar experience. I'd like to thank President Dickinson and Raymond Sewell, whose reflections began the event today with a meaningful grounding in their experiences of family. Miriam, in your opening comments, you reminded us of the predominance and power of the image of the nuclear family, despite its dramatic departure from many of our experiences of family, including your own. Margaret, you prompted us to think about the many ways disability can enter our family lives and the critical importance of challenging narrow understandings of who family is and who is recognized as family more generally. Derico, you illustrated for us the downloading of social issues and their solutions onto families and the ways in which we fail families when we don't recognize that their struggles are socially structured. Nahal, you have shown us the need to be aware of, open to, and also responsive to culturally grounded definitions of families that change over time for newcomer families. And Todd, you have demonstrated the need and power of understanding that families aren't always sites of care and the need to understand intersections of gender and experiences of family violence and to find responsive and diverse ways to repair and prevent harm within families. Pardon me. When I looked at the participant list for today, I could see that we come here from many walks of life and from many areas of the country. We're researchers, policymakers, lawmakers, service providers, medical practitioners, and others. And attending online for our people from many provinces and territories across Canada. We've seen today how all of us will do our jobs better and be stronger members of our communities if we consider the diversity of families in Canada. We understand their experiences and we listen to their voices. So I would like to end by thanking you, Maryam, for moderating this really important conversation today, and panelists for helping us take meaningful steps towards a goal of creating a Canada in which all families can thrive. We have. Do you want to do the rest? No, you go ahead. I'll handle.
So I'm just going to have very brief comments while Laurel hands out our little gift bags for the participants. You were spectacular. You were beyond my wildest dreams. The amount of depth of experience and sharing of your knowledge and lived experience working with families was truly incredible. It's better than I could have imagined. And so I just really want to thank you. It was the best way for us as a newly named Department of Aging and Family Science to show the world what we are up to here at Mount Saint Vincent University. And with that, I hope that you'll be able to stay a little while longer, all the audience. We have cake to celebrate our new department. So please grab yourself a coffee. It's a wonderful cake and it's huge. So we're going to have to somehow try to eat it all. Thank you again for coming. Thank for those online, for everyone who helped out. Thank you for your incredible questions, and especially thank you for your incredible insight. Thank you.